All right, welcome everybody. We're going to get started with this month's tune and just explain a little bit first about how everything's organized. If you have had a chance to check out the PDF, if you haven't, I've put a link up at the top of the chat. And basically, we're going to look at 3 techniques this month, and we'll use this month's tune as a way to dive in to each one of those things week by week. But so as we go, I've sort of subtitled this month's material Shaping the Melody, because we've spent a lot of time last few months looking at the right hand and the permutations and just sort of getting that coordination between the thumb and the fingers going. And I want to spend some time this month looking at some of the left hand issues, specifically strengthening your hammer-ons in the first week, pull-offs in the second week, and then third week is a bit of a catch-all. We'll talk a bit about double stops and also about certain kinds of damping techniques that help you to sort of have a stronger groove when you play. So this week we'll be getting into hammer-ons as we also work on the tune itself. So we'll still end up with a fundamental and an embellished version this week. But then in the next 2 weeks, as we add in these other techniques, we'll have additional fundamental and embellished versions of the tune to work with as well. So that is the idea. So go and download the PDF if you haven't, and we will get started. Oh, hang on a second. Here we go. Okay, I have to remember how this works. I have this new way of posting the PDF in the video, and I don't remember how to advance from one screen to the next. So give me a second here to figure that out. There it is. Okay, cool. Okay, so 5 things we're going to be thinking about this month. Articulations, which is kind of a catch-all term for things like hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides, and that kind of thing. And then, so I'm trying to make sure I can see everything and everybody that I need to at once. And then changing position, right? Because this is definitely a left-hand issue of, if you've got licks down here and licks up here, being able to get in and around and about. So we're going to have some exercises as we do hammer-ons for moving those hammer-ons from position to position. Same thing for pull-offs. Anticipations. This is really like one of the key elements of making things sound more syncopated. And one of the big distinctions this week between the fundamental and the embellished version is doing hammer-ons right on the downbeat and anticipating the hammer-ons. So we'll get into that. I've got some exercises for that as well. And then some double stops, because when you've got this kind of single note melody, one of the things that can help fill out the middle ground between the bass and the melody is having some double stops. And we'll get mostly into that in week 3. I've got kind of a reharmonization / sky tone line way of playing through the tune that I think is pretty cool. And then groove elements. We've had this already with a tune like this. It's an 8-bar blues, and often in an 8-bar blues, the last 2 bars, bar 7 and 8, the melody's kind of over. It's the equivalent of where you put the turnaround in a 12-bar blues. But in this case, it's bar 7 and 8, which are often a place where you want to put in some kind of additional motion in the bass or some kind of bass and chord motion to answer the melody that's just been completed. So that's the idea behind all those ideas. So to start off, let's just talk a little bit about just hammer-ons themselves, right? And just a few specific things. And the most important thing is to be really decisive when you play them. The thing that will really make a hammer-on lose its steam is if your finger comes down onto the string too slowly. Because if you think about it, here's the string, right? And your finger's coming down. And if you come down slowly, the minute your fingers touch the string, it's going to stop vibrating. And then it doesn't matter like what happens when you push towards the fretboard, like the string's already done, right? So you've got to be quick, not rush, but just when the actual motion happens, it's got to be quick. I should have said decisive. That's better than forceful, but I didn't think of that when I was writing this out. So the second thing is to aim for the fingerboard. So don't aim for the string, aim for the wood underneath. Like you want to basically have your finger, I mean, it's, you know, I don't actually know this firsthand, but it's the thing you always see them talking about in like karate movies, where it's like, you know, you just imagine that your hand is already through the wood or whatever. It's like you want your finger to be aiming for the fretboard, not the string. Like the string is just something that's kind of an inconvenience in your way to the fretboard. And so if you think about aiming for the wood, you'll have the proper sort of effect of just the string is just there. And so you don't stop when you hit the string, you keep going, and that way the string will keep vibrating when you get there. And the third thing is, with all that in mind, don't rush that note. Like you don't want to, you know, sometimes you want to play a note and you want the full value of the first note before you get to the hammer-on. So you have to develop the strength to let the note sit there and know that when you go to get it with your second finger, you're going to get the note. And so you don't want to, there's times when you want it as a grace note, and there's times when you want it as a separate note. And so it's learning the difference between those two things. So those are just some things to keep in mind. The exercise that I think is sort of the most valuable to see if any of this is working is to keep your picking hand out of it altogether and just see if you can go. And if you can create that note from nothing, right? That's where most of the sound comes from, is from the finger touching the fingerboard, not from the leftover vibrations from picking the first note. Now, all that can take some time to sort of get into your playing. So don't freak out if it doesn't happen like this afternoon or, you know, tomorrow. But those are just some pointers for how to start working on it. And I can go back and illustrate more of this if it's not clear. But let's get into some exercises. So there are 3 ways we can think about hammer-ons to start with. And I always find that it just takes some of the stress out of it if you can just like quantify what you're looking at. We're only going to really work at starting on a pinch and playing around a pinch today, but just knowing that these are kind of your 3 choices, right? You can start where you pick thumb and finger and then follow with a hammer-on. The next thing that can happen is you might have a note happening on the and the hammer-on finishes when the thumb comes in. Right? So like that. And that's the second example on the page. That's a really important one to be able to do. I don't think it actually came up in this week's version of the arrangement, but I want to put that out there as a thing to be thinking about. And finally, playing, I couldn't think of a better way to describe this than playing around the pinch. Like if you pick before the pinch, and in this case there is no pinch, right? You have a note, you play a bass note, and then you finish the hammer-on. So that's like basically if you had this on beat 1, like 1 and, you have a pinch on 1 and a hammer-on and then more bass notes. Now what if you anticipated that first note? You played it on the and of 4. So instead of playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, if you moved that first note up a half a beat, you'd have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. that's the last example on the page. Yes, Valerie, and hello. We are still in drop D. So should have mentioned that because I didn't actually write it out on the handout. But so those are the three kinds of hammer-ons that we're going to be dealing with. And I also forgot to make sure that I know what time it is and that my phone does not do anything dark in the middle of this lesson, like start making noise. Okay, cool. So we got that. Now, some exercises, right? So I just took, we are in drop D, and I'm still playing the alternating thumb on the 6th string and the 4th string, playing an alternating thumb. We spent a lot of time on this last month. I didn't write out just the bass, but if you're new and you want to look at just sort of like the bass in isolation and get some basic exercises to start putting the thumb and fingers together, you can look at the soloing, the Foundations of Improvisation Volume 2, which is all the February 2023 lessons, and there's a lot of this just basic right hand coordination in there. So for these exercises in the first line, excuse me, we have, this is how you know that I'm not an AI simulation, because if you ever read that Isaac Asimov story about like the alien that sneezes and gives itself away. Anyway, that's a digression. On the first line, I just took some basic moves that you'd want to have in D around the D chord and around the notes of the D minor pentatonic scale. So just hammering on from the 4th to the 5th, and from the flat 7 to the root, and from the flat 3rd to the 4th. And so in this case, we're just going to pinch. In the first measure, we're going to pinch from the flat 7 and then hammer on to the root. So 1 and then beat 2, and then beat 3, and then beat 4. So, and we're going to swing the 8th note. So the first note is longer. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and okay. So that's the basic coordination. So it's really just a pinch for your right hand, and then the hammer-on, and then keep that going. So then in the next measure, we're gonna move that to the next string, so you get some practice crossing strings. First measure, second measure, back to the first measure, and then hammering on from an open string in the 4th measure. So again, this is just practice, you know, combining the hammer-on technique with the alternating thumb, with the right hand coordination. And then in the second line of this page, we're moving up to the 3rd position, because we could also play, and we had some blues licks last month in this position here at the 3rd fret. So now we have a bigger stretch, right? It's a little bit more challenging to get that far from the 3rd fret to the 6th fret, index and pinky. The pinkies, this is a good exercise for just building up the pinky strength. And then on the next string, from the 3rd fret to the 5th fret. So, just getting familiar with those two positions, where the notes are, what you got to be able to do, and some different stretches, and some different combinations. First, you know, index finger and 3rd finger, index finger and pinky, open and 2nd finger. And then in the 3rd line of this page, we've got some position changes. So we start off in the 1st position, and then go up to the 3rd position on the high string, and then back to the 1st position, and then back to the 3rd position. So as you go through these, it just gives you a bunch of different ways to go through this and just be developing both some facility with changing position and just getting those hammer-ons clean and getting all of that integrated with this guy. So that's what these exercises are for. Again, just trying to provide sort of like a taxonomy and like a breakdown for the left hand, like we've been doing so much for the right hand. So with that, we can start to get into the tune. So Jack of Diamonds is an 8-bar blues. I know Johnny F already posted at least a playlist or a link and suggesting him some different versions. So most people play it. It's as a 1-chord tune. I think there's some slide versions. I can't remember. But Mance Lipscomb, Lightning Hopkins, those kind of people, great source. As an aside, it sounds to me like it shares a lot of musical DNA with the British Isles tune Rain and Snow, and a lot of American blues and Appalachian folk music. I mean, a lot of it has, all of it, or a huge amount of it, has roots in that British Isles tradition. So that's not super surprising. I haven't done the research yet to figure out like if that's like a real thing, that connection or not, but I think it's interesting. And anybody who's like a Grateful Dead fan knows Rain and Snow. I learned it from the Pentangle, but it's a really common traditional tune as well. So there's Jack of Diamonds. So we're going to do it in D, and so we've got the alternating thumb that we've been working on here on the 6th string and the 4th string. And I'll just play through this version first, and you'll notice that if you look, you can see that the hammer-ons happen at the beginning of, so that little pickup phrase at the beginning, those first 2 notes, that is not measure 1. And I know it looks like it is measure 1, but it's considered a pickup phrase. It's only 2 beats. Measure 1 starts where the repeat sign starts. That's the heavy bar, the light bar, and the 2 dots at the beginning of, on the 3rd note, basically. So that's what I'm calling measure 1. And if you start there, you can see there's 4 measures in the first line and 4 measures in the second line. So we have this pickup phrase. I'll just play through it once. You can see the hammer-ons are all happening on one and. So on one and at the beginning of measure 1, one and at the beginning of measure 2, one and at the beginning of measure 3, and one and at the beginning of measure 5. Other than that, you're picking all the notes, and this is straight out of the exercises that we just looked at. Right? So, and nothing happens over here, right? It's just a pinch right on the downbeat. So here's what the hammer-on version fundamental sounds like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And then it repeats if you want to. Here's the top. So the tune itself, you can see there's a lot of repetition. So that's those 2 bars then get answered by going down. And the 3rd phrase repeats that and then ends with just a little bit more. So there's really only a couple of measures worth of actual material in here. And once you have that coordinated, everything is kind of a development of that opening idea. So if we break it down into just the melody like that, we can see there's a series of phrases. And so if you want to take this through that horizontal 3-step process, the first thing to do is just isolate the melody and see what's going on. And when you can hear it as phrases, it's easier to remember. So we have this opening line, all happening up here in the 3rd position, and then landing back down here, repeating that. And if you go and check out a recording of it, you'll hear the words, and having that in mind can also help you remember the phrasing and think about playing the melody in a more sort of lyrical or vocal way, which can also help and make it feel more musical. So there's the melody, if we isolate that, and I'm doing everything in the third position, and I'm using, my middle finger for the second string and the ring finger for the high string. And then to isolate the bass, step 2 of the horizontal 3-step, you're just looking at this. It's 8 bars of alternating thumb for now. And so you can try to count through all the bars. I'm on bar 6 now, and then 7, 2, 3, 4, 8, 2, 3, 4. So I see your comment, Nancy. Straight rhythm, no syncopation. Just that one at the beginning of each of measures 1, 2, 3, and 5. Because if it was completely straight, right? So instead we have these 2 syncopations. But yeah, the rest is totally straight. Again, for now, just to kind of get a baseline and see what the straight rhythm feels like, the unsyncopated version, and then we can syncopate it and see what's going on. So when you know what the melody is and you know what the bass is, then you can go and look and see, well, where am I pinching? Where do the thumb and the fingers line up? So around this first beat here of the first measure, and then on beats 3 and 4, and then again on beat 1, and then on beats 3 and 4, and then beat 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1. So it's very regular in that sense where the pinches are. They're on beats 1, 3, and 4, right? So I'll play the whole thing again. So there's the fundamental with just one kind of hammer-on, a hammer-on on the downbeat, and the same hammer-on every time through the tune. So next. So I mentioned this before, the anticipated hammer-on. So let me just walk through this a little bit so we can do a fundamental version. And I can stop and answer a couple questions here too. So question from Nancy, are we in F minor? Actually D minor, right? Because it's drop D, and here's the note D. So we've got the root and the flat third and the fourth and the fifth of D. It's a little confusing because we're not in open position, right? Because of this note here. I mean, if you started here, you'd have to get yourself up here somewhere. So we're in D minor, and from Janice, is it a matter of preference to use the pinky or the ring finger on the hammer-ons? Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I tend to think in terms of one finger per fret. So if I'm going up 2 frets, I'll usually go from the index to the ring, but I think that's what I'm thinking about it. When I'm just doing it, I think I might end up using my pinky sometimes. I mean, for something like this, it's definitely, to me, too far to use the ring finger. But I grew up around rock guitar players who never used their pinky, which I could never understand, but they would play pentatonic licks. guess because the ring finger is stronger, but that felt incredibly awkward to me. But so for this hammer-on, I think I probably do use the pinky a fair amount. I'm not really sure. I don't think I have a rule for it. When I'm thinking about it, I use my ring finger, but when I'm just playing, I probably intuitively grab it with the pinky sometimes as well. So that's my incredibly evasive answer about that. And back to the key thing. Yeah, so this is just, I don't always put in a key signature because for blues stuff, sometimes the key signature is more trouble than it's worth. Like in this case, we're in D minor, so we should have, there should be one flat, right? Like a B flat in here. That's the key. One flat is the key signature for D minor because it's the relative minor of F major, which is one flat. But I didn't put in a key signature because sometimes we're going to use B natural in this arrangement, and sometimes we're going to use B flat because blues is weird and doesn't really follow the same exact rules as classical harmony. So I'm full of the evasive answers today. So let me talk about anticipations, which I'm also calling hammer-ons around a pinch, which I just realized is a terrible name because if it's around the pinch, there is no pinch. So it's around the downbeat, I guess I should have said. On this page, the first example where it says on the 1 is what we've been doing. And if you haven't seen this notation before, that second 3 in the parentheses just means you don't pick that note again. It means you're still hearing it, it's being held, but you don't have to pick it again. So we have a pinch on the downbeat, a hammer-on the and. But if we were going to anticipate, then we'd have that first note coming in before the downbeat, so on the and of 4, which on its own looks like the second example on the first line. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And I apologize, these first 2 examples should not have an A bass on beat 3. I'm not sure how that got in there. But anyway, it should just be going back and forth between the 6th string and the 4th string. So I'll try to fix that in a subsequent PDF. So just keep the thumb going between the 6th string and the 4th string. So, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. So then on the second line, I just looped this around so you could practice it and wrote out the timing underneath so you could really understand where you're picking in relation to the strong beats and the weak beats. So once you get into that 2-bar loop, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and here's the beginning of the first measure again, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2. So you may have to really slow it down. And 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. So that's a good exercise for just getting that anticipation under your fingers. And then the last line on this page is an exercise for doing all of that while changing position. So same exercise as on the previous page or a couple pages back, but now we're going to move up here. Let's see, what order did I do them in? Yeah, that's right. So, and then next measure up here at the 3rd fret, back to the 1st fret, and then 3rd fret. So again, just to take that one syncopation and get used to putting it in all the different places and getting used to moving it around and changing position. Now, as usual, like nobody's expecting you to do all of this in a week necessarily. It just depends on what you're ready for. If that first fundamental version is enough to work on, cool, just work on that. If you can play that already and you want something more syncopated and tricky to work on, then you can go through this page of exercises. And when you're comfortable with that, you can use that to apply it to this Hammerons version, this embellished version of the Hammerons version, right? So the top two lines, you can see that we have the same. The only real difference between the fundamental version and this version is we have a syncopated hammer-on round the pinch at the end of measure 1 going into measure 2. So there it is. And 4 and 1 and 2. So from the beginning of the first line, right on the downbeat, syncopated, and then we come back to the and then we have a little bit of syncopation at the end of measure 3, which I honestly, let me check and see. I don't remember if that was, oh yeah. So there's no hammer on here, but the end of measure 3 also has an anticipation. So here's measure 3. Instead of playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then in measure 5 we repeat that, and then we have some double stops here. So instead of just playing, we're going to play and change position at the end. So we're playing the flat 7 and the flat 3rd of D, and then going down to the root and 5th of D. So the whole embellished version, let me play it one time. And then change position here and so the last thing you see on the page is this syncopating the melody with anticipations. And so, like I was saying at the beginning of the lesson, those last 2 bars, there's no melody. So it's a place for a little bit of variation. And so one thing you can do is use a variation on the bass to make things a little more interesting. And so instead of using the 6-4-6-4 pattern, you can use 6-4-5-4, 6-4-5-4. And so that, in those last 2 bars, gives you the chord, and then 3rd fret on the 5th string, and then 5th fret as you go into the next round of the melody. Right? So those last 2 measures, measure 7 and 8, the second 2 lines, the second 2 measures of the second line. And then you're back into it. If it's more confusing to switch the bass up like that, you can just leave it on 6 and 4, like in the fundamental. And then on the last 2 lines of this page, you can see, here's just a little bit of a breakdown. These are the rudiments behind that syncopation in measure 3 and measure 5, right? So initially we're playing, that's just the rhythm of what's happening in measures 3 and 5. So that breaks down to just 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2. But so that's what the 3rd line of music on this page looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if we syncopate that, what we're doing is we're taking that D note in measure 2 on the 3rd line, and we're moving it up half a beat to the and of 4. So then that gives us the last example on the page. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's the syncopation, and you can apply it to measures 3 and 5. So instead of having this, we have. So those last two lines on the page are just kind of a breakdown of that rhythm. Okay, comment from Ben. Hey, Ben. I really want to move up the D chord in measure 7 to the and of 4 in measure 6. Hard to slow down to play 3/4 notes in a row. Be my guest, man. If you can make that syncopation work, here's the second line. No problem. That would sound good. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is just those last two measures. This is the 5th string groove. We've had this last month also when we were working on improvisation, because we were also putting in some answers in the last two measures of an 8-bar solo. But so this is just what the bass looks like if you're doing a more sort of embellished bass, right? 6, 4, 5, 4, 6 string, 4th string, 5th string, 4th string. And then the next measure is what happens if you decide to put in some bass motion by the right hand is now still doing just 6, 4, 5, 4, but then we're playing a fretted note on the 5th string. So that's the breakdown of what that's about, and you can see that in action in measures, in the second line, measures 7 and 8. And it just creates some variety. You don't really miss that 6, 4, 5, 4 bass when you're playing the melody. But once the melody's resting, it's nice to have a little more motion. So that is everything for this week. And again, it's really just 3 things, right? It's just, here are the hammer-ons played on the beat or around the beat. Here are the hammer-ons applied to the tune. This is the tune itself with isolating the melody and the bass and putting it back together. And then if you want to add some syncopations in, this is the embellished version with the syncopations. I thought it would be a good idea, instead of just presenting the embellished version, to start saying, like, here's how the embellished version becomes embellished, right? Because ultimately, you want to be able to take a melody and do your own embellishment of it, right? So if we break it down and look at the difference between the melody played straight and the melody played syncopated, where the syncopations come in, where the double stops are added in, that might help to start to clarify that and give you a better sense of how it's done so you can do it yourself. Yeah, good observation in the comments. This bass note is not hammered on. If you want to hammer on, you can. I didn't include it as a hammer on this week because it's really tricky. You've got to get in and then get out so that you're not covering this note. And I thought it might be just one item too many to deal with. We are going to have a pull-off in the bass next week. So if you sort of looked ahead in the tab, you can see that's going on. So you could do a hammer on there, but I didn't want to make it too many things at once. What is the tempo for this tune? Let me think about it. I can tell you what tempo I'm playing it at right now. Just using like a tap tempo tool. Let's see. What? I guess I'm playing it around 115. maybe a little faster, but about there. Yeah. Okay, so that's what we've got this week. And if you want to look ahead, feel free. It's basically going to follow this format next week and the week after. So we'll talk about techniques for pull-offs and have some specific exercises for that. Integrate the pull-offs into playing through the tune, and then finally look at some damping techniques and some double stop ideas, and we'll include those in the tune as well. You don't have to feel like you're responsible for like 5 or 6 versions of the tune. It's kind of cumulative. We're going to basically take this Hammerons version next week and, incorporate the pull-offs and a little more syncopation. And then the last week, we'll look at the damping as added to what we've got so far. And then the only thing that's really different is that once you're doing the double stops, you don't have as much room for as many hammer-ons and pull-offs. But it's basically just trying to take the idea of looking at the tune and give everybody a little more time to learn and develop the tune itself, instead of feeling like you only have like 1 week to learn the tune before you have to like start, working on the arrangement or adding in the soloing or whatever. So just trying to give everything a little more breathing room, so you can actually take your time and actually work on it. Question from Blake: will we solo on this tune? Yes. In fact, you already have, basically, because last month's improvisation material is based on playing in D over an alternating thumb and doing the phrasing and having the ideas and having them developed. So we've basically covered the improvisation piece that we need to start soloing on this. You could go right now and take this fundamental or embellished tune and go right into one of the model solos, or just start improvising from that point of view, like with the licks, with the vocabulary of licks that we've done all through last month. So we kind of front loaded by doing the improvisation stuff first, because that's also a really good way to work on the coordination and the right hand in general. This month we'll be into the tune itself with some of these techniques. And then that means that next month we can really focus on putting the tune together. We can talk a little bit about, the vamp and what makes a vamp and how it's put together. Same thing for the shout chorus, and just really focus on getting the whole thing together. So that way you're not trying to arrange the whole tune in a week or a week or two, but you have time to really, put it all together and have a little time to practice it, ask questions about it, see how everything fits together. So I hope that makes sense. That's basically the premise. So let me just, if you've got other questions, I see some comments, which is cool. Exactly what I didn't know I needed. Excellent. And from Janice, yeah, these technique ideas make a difference in how the piece sounds. That is the idea. That's why the subtitle is Shaping the Melody, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that I think a lot of guitar players, and particularly guitar teachers, we kind of take for granted. That you can show someone a hammer-on and it's like, oh yeah, that's a hammer-on, of course. But what you forget is, like, it takes time to like get a hammer-on to sound good. It takes time to kind of figure out like what a pull-off does and how to fit it into the coordination with the the thumb and the fingers and everything. So I thought it would help everybody, even like more advanced players, to go back and kind of dial in some of this stuff. So let me play through the tune one more time. Let me just show you. I'll play the tune. I'll do a little improvising based on what we did last month, and then come back out and play the tune again. And then if you got questions, post them while I'm doing that, and we'll wrap it up. So just real simple ideas in there in the middle, framed by the melody on either side. You can take some of that stuff from last month, and you don't have to look at it right now, but if you want to, you can just go back a month, and that's where all the alternating thumb drop D ideas are for improvising. Okay, so that's this week. Again, this stays up and archived. This is the first week's material. So, if you're watching this on replay, just make sure you download the PDF and take your time working through this. Look at the fundamental, look at the embellished, do some of the exercises. Just work on whatever sort of level of this week's stuff makes sense to you. Leave your thoughts in the forum if you've got more questions, and then we'll get into pull-offs starting next Thursday.